some in the Trump campaign are saying that in places like New Hampshire, they and Virginia, they could actually take those states. And if they do, then that means that all this talk of swing states that every single expert's been banging on for weeks will probably not be quite an accurate description of what happened.
If you were to do a word cloud of all the coverage of the US elections, surely the word swing states would be in big letters. What is a swing state? Why should we be watching them closely over the next 48 hours? Times Radio presenter and undisputed king of the swingers.
Come on.
It says here, Adam Boulton is going to guide us through the US election all this week. Adam, good morning to you.
Good morning.
The swing states, that's why they have their name. They're always important. Are they more important or are they more close this time than in recent memory?
Well, I think they're important because the last two elections have basically been decided in these 7 states. They're kind of the upper half of American states, but in terms of population, they're not the big ones like Texas, California, or New York, which are pretty much predicted California and New York to go for Kamala Harris, and Texas, of course, is seen as a red state. So what that means is going into this race, bearing in mind that the Electoral College is decided on a state-by-state basis, that Kamala Harris is probably pretty much guaranteed of about 226 votes, and that Electoral College votes. Trump is probably guaranteed about 219. So it's those 7 states with between them some 93 Electoral College votes who are going to decide it. And then you can go even closer in and you can say, normally, the Democrats are strong in the so-called Rust Belt states, the states that were heavy industry. So we got Wisconsin, we got Pennsylvania, and we got Michigan. Historically, in recent times at least, there's been a southern firewall for the Republicans. So those states such as North Carolina, Georgia, Nevada, and Arizona have tended to be red. So the battle is effectively how can you become president? And the answer is you do it by getting the bulk of those swing states. So, for example, last time round, Joe Biden won. He got 6 out of 7 of the swing states. Time before, Donald Trump won. He got all 7 of the swing states. So they do move around and they therefore become decisive. I would have to say I'm a little bit of a swing skeptic, because I think what's happened in the last 2 elections is not necessarily what's going to happen this time. And it's been interesting that we've seen some outliers. For example, we had that one poll by a highly respected polling organization in Iowa, which has been seen as red, suggesting that could flip blue. And likewise, some in the Trump campaign are saying that in places like New Hampshire, they and Virginia, they could actually take those states. And if they do, then that means that all this talk of swing states that every single expert's been banging on for weeks will probably not be quite an accurate description of what happens.
And the bottom line is we don't entirely know whether the polling is accurate, do we? And there could be lots of young women who are being not counted, which could mean that Kamala Harris is doing better. There could be shy Trump voters. And that's the question, isn't it? That polling is, you can never fully rely on it, can you?
Well, you absolutely can't. I mean, look at our own election. I mean, British polls, generally speaking, are better than American polls, but they told us that Labour was going to win, but they didn't really give us the flavour of how close it was all going to be. Now, in America, the last 3 elections, the polls, when they've started what they call herding, i.e. all agreeing with each other so no one looks embarrassed at the end, they've actually been wrong 3 times. They were wrong in the midterms in 2022. They underestimated the vote for the Democrats, which is why Democrats are quite optimistic, saying, well, we're probably going to do better than the polls because women in particular, as you say, are going to come to us. On the other hand, the 2 previous elections, the 2021 and the 2016 one, which Donald Trump won, he was underestimated. So that gives them hope. But just to give you an example of how important they regard the states, just got this message from the Kamala Harris campaign. Guess where she's going tomorrow, as she puts it, i.e. today, the last day of campaigning. Atlanta, Georgia, Detroit, Michigan, Las Vegas, Nevada, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Phoenix, Arizona, Raleigh, North Carolina, and Pittsburgh, ending up, of course, in the most important swing state, Pennsylvania, again, with the most number of electoral college votes, 19. So that is where they are concentrating. That's where the tacticians are telling them they've got to go. And Trump will be doing a similar progression through those swing states.
Yeah, what an extraordinary day that will be, going into all of those states in one day. You can imagine the air miles just absolutely clocking up. Adam, can't wait to have you on the programme throughout this week. You're going to be here for our election coverage overnight and with us in the morning as well. Adam Boulton, he's seen a few American elections. This one is going to be an absolute corker, and he'll give us some guidance as we go along.
Kamala Harris and Donald Trump have spent the day blitzing through several swing states today, with the race for the White House so close that convincing just a few undecided voters could genuinely alter the outcome. Kamala Harris has been in Michigan. Donald Trump has stopped off in Pennsylvania, which is where we're going to head tonight. Speaking to, is it Littles? Iltz? In Pennsylvania? Littitz in Pennsylvania. I've never even heard of that. Trump seemed rattled by some of the polls showing him trailing Harris in key swing states.
The polls are just as corrupt as some of the writers back there. They can make those polls sing. They can make them sing. They brag about it. I got a poll, I'm 10 points up in Iowa. One of my enemies just puts out a poll, I'm 3 down. Joni Ernst called me. Everyone's called me. They said, you're killing in Iowa. The farmers love me and I love them. But they came up. They just announced a fake poll. Hey, think of it. Right before the election, that I'm 3 points down. I'm not down in Iowa.
Donald Trump in Pennsylvania tonight. The swing state of all swing states. It's worth 19 electoral college votes. There isn't really a path to the White House without it, particularly for Kamala Harris. Most polls currently have it as too close to call. Well, let's check in with Charles Franklin, who is director of the Marquette Law School poll. Charles, hello, good evening.
Yes, good evening.
Thank you for being with us. And Kate Hwangapu, who is government reporter at Spotlight, PA. Kate, hello, good evening.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Oh, real pleasure. Kate, you are in Pennsylvania. So set the scene for us, if you will, as to why this is such a critical state to win.
Yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, Pennsylvania has 19 electoral college votes. That's a big count. And we also have a very split demographic politically. For example, our state legislature has Democrats leading the House, Republicans leading the Senate. So that's all to say that there's just a lot of people here who vote for both parties and could really go either way.
Okay. Then take us into the sort of numbers of that, Charles. What kind of numbers are we talking about? How tight, how close really is Pennsylvania?
Yeah, it's very close. If you look at the polling averages, and this is true of most of the swing states, actually, we're looking at tenths of a percentage point separating the candidates. New polling for Pennsylvania just today has a 48 to 48 dead tie, for example. Right. And we've seen Pennsylvania remain this close throughout the fall campaign, even though I wouldn't call it comfortably went for Biden, but it went for Biden by over a percentage point. Here in Wisconsin, where we vote by less than a percentage point, Pennsylvania seemed like a big margin 4 years ago, but it looks closer than Wisconsin this year.
Okay, so incredibly close. Kate, just take us onto the ground there and set the scene of life in Pennsylvania and how that is playing into the way that people are going to vote in this election.
Yeah, I mean, Pennsylvania is a big state. I'm based in Philly and I'm about to drive out to Pittsburgh tomorrow, which is at the opposite end. And it's about, 5-6 hours. I think across the board, folks are pretty tired about hearing about elections. I went door knocking this week with a lot of candidates for swing seats in the state legislature. And most of the folks who were answering the doors and actually engaging were still very much complaining just about how frequently they're getting texts and how often they're hearing about the election point blank. But a lot of issues that they're talking about are things like inflation and lowering costs, immigration policy, abortion policy, and those have sort of been the leading issues for quite a while now.
Right. So immigration and cost of living, you say?
Yes, those
Is
are
that right?
definitely two things that I've heard voters talk about.
Okay. And so correct me if I'm wrong, Charles, but they're kind of Trump's territory, aren't they?
Yes, and what we've seen now, each state is a little different, but in Wisconsin, the economy's number one by a big margin, followed with abortion policy in second place, but with immigration a close third. Trump is seen as better by voters on the economy and on immigration, while Harris has a significant lead on abortion policy. But when we put all of the issues together, Trump is seen as better on the issue people think is most important to them by 46% compared to 43% who see Harris as better. So on these top issues, Trump has a small but measurable lead, at least here in Wisconsin.
Okay. In terms of Kate, in terms of the abortion issue, which does appear to be a really central issue. It is a mobilizing issue, shall we say? Actually, the best way to describe it, isn't it, is that there are lots and lots of women mobilized to vote, largely against Donald Trump and for Kamala Harris on this issue. Is that playing in Pennsylvania?
Yes, for sure. I think something that Charles mentioned that is a little bit different in Pennsylvania, right, is that in Pennsylvania, a lot of the times you're trying to cater to independent voters who aren't registered with Democrats or Republicans. They're probably the voters that people think will make the most difference, right? Because they're uncommitted to either party. And for independent voters, at least for independent voters who are women, I think over 60% of them rate abortion as their top issue. So it's really resonating on the ground. And I've definitely spoken to a lot of voters who that is the only issue that they care about. That is the thing that is defining who they will be voting for this election.
Okay, and so Charles, do we think then that a really mobilizing issue like abortion is more mobilizing than, say, the cost of living or immigration, and therefore, whilst it might not necessarily be the sort of top priority for the people in the state, there are enough people incensed enough about it for it to be the overwhelming issue, if that makes sense?
No, I think it is mobilizing, and we see consistently women care a lot more about it than men do. But what we've seen around the country is a number of statewide referenda, and in every one of them, the abortion rights side has won when people are voting on just that as a referendum. But in those same states, we've seen Republican governors who signed restrictive legislation get reelected. And so there's no question that when it's the only issue on the ballot, abortion rights wins. But when it comes to voting for candidates, it's just one in a mix of issues and not really a single issue that can overwhelm an incumbent governor's broad record rather than just their signing restrictive abortion laws.
Okay, that's interesting. Kate, in terms of what Republicans and Democrats, activists, campaigners, candidates, what are they actually thinking? What are they telling you about how they rate their chances?
I think everyone's pretty much just grasping, trying to read the tea leaves. Polls are very, very close. They've been within margin of error for both candidates. Like if one candidate or the other has a lead in a poll, it's usually within the margin of error. So there's nothing sort of definitive. I think most of the times when I'm talking to people who are working on campaigns and organizing events, they're kind of just in their final push and trying to, knock on as many doors, text as many voters, reach out to as many voters as possible, and sort of in the phase of mobilizing, as many possible people as possible to actually go out and vote on Tuesday.
Okay, all right. So they're not committing, basically. So that's what you're saying. They're clearly not committing.
Yeah, pretty much.
Can I just ask you as well, Kate? A lot of attention is being paid to the process of counting votes. 2020 was a year marred by accusations from Donald Trump's campaign of interference, etc., baseless, unfounded. But the process by which votes were counted was central to that, wasn't it? And quite a few states have either made more robust their process or altered their process or tried to strengthen their process. What is happening to that effect in Pennsylvania, and how will that affect when we get the vote and how we get the vote?
Yeah, so in Pennsylvania, because as I mentioned, we have a split legislature, it is harder to pass election reform policy. So things like pre-canvassing, which would allow election workers to start counting mail ballots before election day morning. That would just basically give folks more time and people could get results earlier. That's an example of something that is bipartisan and not super controversial, but the legislature still hasn't passed because there's just a lot of rhetoric around uh, election reform right now. So functionally, not much has changed about the way that Pennsylvania is, going forth with its election. The legislature did pass an bill, I believe, in 2021 that basically gives county election directors more money. So it's election grant. So up to, I think, like a few $1,000,000, depending on the size of your county. So Philly, for example, will be getting millions of dollars, whereas smaller counties might get, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands. So there is more funding, which I've heard from election directors has been, significant in getting new equipment, in hiring more poll workers, just making things more efficient. The attachment to that bill program, though, is basically that once a county starts counting ballots, they can't stop. They have to go continuously. And this sort of relates back to what you were mentioning about all of the allegations surrounding of impropriety in the ballot counting procedure, because in Pennsylvania, it just takes a while. That's sort of how the system is set up right now. So that provision of this act was meant to sort of try to help that along and hurry up the mail counting process.
Okay, that's very interesting. That's something for us to keep an eye on, isn't it, over the next couple of days? All right, listen, I'm going to ask you both the same question, and I want you to combine the data, the conversations you've been having, and what your gut is thinking and feeling. Charles, who's going to win Pennsylvania?
My gut is queasy on this one. I'll give you the real answer, and that is we don't know. Give me a quarter and I'll flip it, and either side could win. I just think that we don't have a good grasp. And if we wake up Wednesday or possibly Thursday and Trump has won, we shouldn't be very surprised. If Harris has won, we shouldn't be very surprised at that. It'll be a big surprise if anybody wins by more than 3 points.
Okay, same question to you, Kate.
Yeah, I mean, I think Charles is exactly right. I think, like, especially in Pennsylvania, it could really go either way. I've talked to voters who are really in favor, like feel strongly about vote either candidate, like their candidate of choice. And polling has not indicated that, it's by any means like a runaway race for either candidate either. So it's really, it's going to take a few days. It's probably going to take at least 2-3 days for Pennsylvania to really have a final count. But in the interim, we're kind of just waiting.